Hi everyone, my name is Monique.
And I'm Naveen from Before You Play.
And welcome to our final Uwe Rosenberg series wrap-up video. Oh my gosh, we're here.
We made it. Yes. So if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, Monique and I have been covering a lot of Uwe Rosenberg games on the channel for the past year and a half, maybe?
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years, maybe. So we've been doing playthroughs and reviews of basically all the games that we could get our hands on. We've also covered many of the tile-laying games, the exclusive like polyomino-only kind of games. And we have a ranking video for that specific kind of genre of his games, which you can check out up here.
Yes, that was actually a separate series that we did as sort of like a warm-up to getting into this one, although we didn't realize how large of a series this was going to be. After finishing the tiling series, we basically said, let's do the big box games. And then we ended up incorporating not only the big box games, but also the smaller two-player only games, and basically all of Uwe Rosenberg's games that we literally could find. So this ended up being a total of, I believe, 18 videos. And so that's not including Hallertau, because Hallertau was a gameplay that we did prior to embarking on the series. But it also includes 2 non-gameplay videos, which were a comparison of the 2 big box, Caverna, Cave versus Cave, and Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small, as well as the big box for Agricola, which was not the most popular of things to be released.
You know, we got to show you what's in it.
Yes. So just a few things before we get into it. We are going to start with just discussing how the overall series went, some of the challenges we faced, and just some of our thoughts on how Uwe Rosenberg designs, and then go into our rankings. Now, there are a lot of games that we had to rank, and so we're going to be basically doing them through a tier system, as you'll see. All right, so it's funny that you're mentioning how long it took. We have posted our first video in the official series on August 15th, 2021.
Oh, wow, 2 years, yeah.
We're about 5 days short of it being a 2-year-long endeavor. And this is for various reasons. It's not ideal, obviously. We would have wanted it to be much shorter than that. But one of the main reasons is because we didn't expect to cover all these games. We thought we had a certain number of them. We had a certain sort of mindset going into it as to what this would look like and how many games it would entail, and it ended up being much larger than that.
Yeah, more games came out, and then also just a lot of the games that we ended up featuring that he designed and released, we had not ever played before. So the build up to be comfortable enough to understand the game, play it on camera, teach it, and then talk about each individual game. That adds so much more time beyond all the other videos that we try to do for the channel.
So let's start with that, actually. Let's start by talking about some of the challenges that we faced started going into this series. We're going to approach this like a research paper, basically. I would say probably the biggest challenge that we had was time. Right.
Yeah,
I know throughout the series, we had a number of comments of people who were kind of like, where's the next game in the series? But doing something like this takes a lot of time. And I think that people know that, but maybe don't realize just exactly how much time each single video takes. A heavier game can take probably like 20 hours total just for one game. For anybody who has a part-time job, maybe that is the entire week of work.
Half a week, yeah.
That's 20 hours of work. So something like A Feast for Odin, just editing A Feast for Odin. So not even the playing or filming, literally just the editing part is probably like 8 hours, which is a whole work day, just because we have to take in the shots so that you can see the game better. So all this to say, it took a long time. So we apologize for it being so much longer than it was, but it is what it is because Naveen also works a full-time job.
Yeah.
And I think when we first started it, I was still working. I was working my day job.
You did not transition to, full-time content.
Until midway of 2022. So half of the series, we were both working.
That's right.
Putting it into that context will hopefully make the 2 years make a bit more sense. But despite these challenges, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was good.
Going into this series, we mentioned that Uwe Rosenberg was one of our favorite designers, and that was what caused us to go on this whole journey in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, because we only had knowledge of about 5 of his games pretty well, and then ballooning that out to now playing about almost 20 extra games from that, and just seeing all the differences that one person can kind of come up with, and how somebody can just come out with a game year after year after year. Because when we go into each video, we always look at what year was this released, and you're like,
yes,
man, that was released, and then that was released. How does one person work on something
Yeah.
They are so committed to the craft of designing board games, and to have so many really, really good ones.
This is built into his DNA at this point, right? Yeah, and that was another thing that was really fascinating. Why I really enjoy doing these series is because we're able to chronicle them in order. And so you can kind of see his design style evolve. You can kind of play the later games and also remember the mechanics that were in the earlier games that probably led up to this large magnum opus, right? Yeah. So it was a lot of fun, despite the time spent. Now, we actually don't really own some of the games anymore, so all of the B-roll that you're going to see is going to be from the videos that we made. And so you will probably see our journey through content creation change over time as well, because in those 2 years...
still images.
Yes, in those 2 years, we have also upgraded our studio behind the scenes. Now, moving on to what we learned. So, this is a long series. We learned a lot of things about Uwe Rosenberg along the way. Let's just start with going into it. What were your sort of preconceived notions of Uwe Rosenberg and his games just before getting into the series?
Well, I always knew Euro. Like, you're going to get a pure Euro. You're not going to get like a attack, roll dice, and fighting kind of game. Even though there is some die rolling in one of his games. But it's not like you're attacking each other, obviously. So,
there's no battle.
Resource conversion and just kind of like... obviously, the farming theme is something that I always knew. It's something that was always told to me, and I could just easily see it in just some of his other games.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually. Going into the series, that was what I knew in my mind. That Uwe Rosenberg, farming. We are going to farm so much over the span of this series.
Euro farmer with always some little mechanism, the feeding mechanism, obviously, that everybody talks about, that anchors you to justify why you're doing something, but also forcing you to kind of split your attention between like, I still need to focus on this slightly. So I can't just go on my own little adventure and just say, forget that one element of it, because it's going to drag you back down. So that's something that we see a lot of times in a lot of his games.
And that's funny that you mentioned that. Those are the two exact things that I had in my mind about Uwe Rosenberg, farming and feeding. Right? Because of Agricola, Caverna, A Feast for Odin, those were the main three that I had played, and they all have farming and feeding. And surprisingly, that's not the case in all of his games.
Not at all.
They're not all farming themes.
Right.
Actually, only a few of them are. And only a few of them require you to feed your workers.
Yeah, I don't think in Hallertau you have to feed your workers.
I don't think you have workers.
No.
It's not the same sort of implementation of a farming theme, definitely. So all of this to say, those two things that I sort of had in my mind is sort of selling him short. There's a lot more to Uwe Rosenberg's designs than just those two things. Art style, they're all sort of similar in that regard. It all kind of speaks to you.
It speaks to me. It's got that old timey Euro, just kind of just floating through time. It's
that lookout games look.
Lookout games that Clemens Franz look. I personally like it. I know people are kind of split on it, but it's so homely to me. Like anytime I see a box that has that art style on it with that like iconography, and you see the little resources, I'm like, this is a nice looking game.
This is an Naveen game. Now, people getting into the hobby now are probably not going to have that sort of same sense of homeliness, because when we got into the hobby, a lot of the games were like that.
Sure.
And nowadays, the art is way different.
Very different.
But that is definitely a homely feeling. And of course, we learned a lot about the different mechanisms that Uwe Rosenberg incorporates into his games. In my opinion, what I saw throughout the series is that he sort of does a few things, and then he'll sort of tweak them, and then incorporate that into a new thing.
And he like shakes it up, and then like spits out, and like, okay, these three are the mechanisms now in this game.
Maybe he'll have like 6 main mechanisms, and then he'll use 2 of them in the next title, and then he won't use them for a while. And then he'll use another 2 in another title, right?
Yep.
The first big bucks game, I suppose, was Agricola. And that, for a lot of people, was what introduced gamers to Uwe Rosenberg. They learned about farming via Agricola, and that was what a Euro was like back then.
I think it came out back in 2007.
Yes, it came out a long time ago.
Yeah.
And the design style of Agricola was never to be seen again, I feel, right? Like, you played Agricola and you felt how tight it was and how punishing it can be, or cutthroat. It's not, it is actually very punishing because if you don't feed your people,
that is the
you're
one,
doomed.
Yeah.
But after that, none of the other games after that were as punishing or as tight as Agricola.
We're talking about for Uwe Rosenberg games,
yes,
right? Yes,
for Uwe Rosenberg games.
Yeah, everything else was less emphasis on like, you must feed, you must spend one of your 3 actions to feed or to find a way to get food. Everything else was like, in the process of taking these other actions, I'm going to find my way to forage this food and to be able to just handle the feeding part of it.
Yes, you're given more tools in a lot of his future games. But Agricola is where we started to see one of his main mechanics that we saw throughout the series, which was, of course, worker placement, but we see that in a lot of Euros, but really his card system. So he does this thing where he'll create a system for the board game, and then he'll just make a bunch of cards.
Ton of cards.
Every time you play, you just switch out what deck you use, and it feels different. Right?
Yeah, because you never know what you're going to get. It's not like one of those games where it's like all 12 of these cards will show up at some point. So you're like, okay, in round 6, I'm most likely going to get access to that one card I know about.
Granted, the worker placement spots are like that.
Worker placement spots, but that's obviously the actions that you're taking.
Yes, the actions that you take. You can, and that's a bit of the strategy with Agricola as well as Caverna.
Yes,
right?
Because you know, like certain actions, if you haven't played Agricola, are going to be uncovered in, let's say, round 7, 8, or 9. You know, we're going to have access to having a third worker or something. I don't remember the exact ones. But the cards themselves, there's always such a thick deck in most of his games that you could play 3 games and see a totally different combination of cards.
Yeah,
so you
especially
can never
now.
rely on just any one specific like card. Like, oh, I'm going to use that card when it shows up, and I know I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating that he's able to have so many different cards.
It's brilliant, really, because if you can fall in love with the system, then now you have a game that you could play over and over and over again. You can play at tournaments, you can do this and that, and that's exactly what happened with Agricola. And it's not only in Agricola, you know, we see this in A Feast for Odin, which is one of the first ways in which we experience that.
Right, that game has the occupation cards, and there's like A, B, and C. You can start with different ones, and over the course of the game, there's a thick, huge one that has a huge index and glossary kind of going through.
Lots of cards.
A ton of cards that you can play with.
There's Ora et Labora that comes with 2 different decks. Of course, there's Hallertau, which sort of...
I think it's like 4 decks.
Sort of relies on that deck system. And then most recently, there's Iranian Burger Canal, right? And that...
Yeah, that one, the base game, I think, starts with deck A and B, and then there's also comes with the game, which is technically an expansion, has like decks C and D. We have not explored decks C and D because that's one of the more recent games that we've played, but I'm really excited to try to play and kind of see what different combinations can be made.
And in addition to the card system, he also plays around a lot with resources, resource conversion. There's the cubes. He did it in cube form in Mercator. With fulfilling contracts.
Yeah, different ways to acquire your resources, different ways to spend them, to kind of game the resources by having your resource wheel move. He has
resource wheel.
The resource wheel, yeah, which was pretty unique, I think.
I think
I had
it
not
was
seen it
introduced in Ora et Labora.
Yeah.
We saw the tile flipping mechanic kind of make an appearance in Le Havre. And then
early design,
an early design, it evolved, and eventually we saw it again in Fields of Arle. We probably saw it a little bit more in between, and then it all led up to eventually A Feast for Odin, which is probably the most epic game of tile resource flipping
orange
that
to
you
red,
can find. Right?
red to green,
Yes.
green to blue. Blue's the best. It's very, very interesting how he was able to just kind of come up with that and also incorporate the polyominoes from his smaller polyomino games like Patchwork into a big, heavy Euro like A Feast for Odin.
He even played around with turn order. You know, some games had different amounts of turns depending on the player count.
Like in Oranian Burger Canal, which is a 1 or 2 player game. Every round, one player is going to get 3 actions in a 2-player game, and the other round, the other player is going to get 3 actions, and your opponent gets only 2 actions. So he does that also in Newsfjord. We saw that.
Ora et
Labora, and also a 2-player Le Havre. You're going to have alternating numbers of turns you're going to take per round, which actually plays into the game quite well for all of them because you can kind of game it where you're like, okay, I'm going last during this round, but that means I get to go first for the next round. So I get double turns on the next round and I get to go back to back.
Yeah.
And so that adds into like some of that strategy and kind of variability.
It's so meta. It's very meta, right?
Yeah.
Like you really get into your head. And I feel like that is a pseudo way of incorporating player interaction in a Euro game. And I really appreciate that. So anyway, we can go on and on about the various mechanics that he employs in his games, but we'll be talking about them a little bit more when we go into our final rankings where we talk about each game. But before we do that, let's have some superlatives, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right, ready?
Yes.
Best theme.
Ooh, best theme. I'm going to go with A Feast for Odin.
Bonanza.
That's a better one. Maybe Bonanza.
Bean farming. Easiest to teach.
It's in my mind. Bonanza.
Easiest?
I think so.
All creatures big and small. Hardest to teach.
It's got to be Feast for Odin. So many spots.
A Feast for Odin.
Yeah.
Easiest to start with.
Raycold.
Glass Road? Best at 2 players, not including the 2-player only games.
Gotta be Le Havre.
Ora et Labora? It's kind of long.
It can be long, yeah.
Biggest surprise?
Ooh, the most recent one, Oranienburger Canal.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Oranienburg Canal. And finally, most different/unique.
Mercator.
Probably Mercator, but also Atiwa. Atiwa I found to be pretty unique. All right, so there you have it. Those are our superlatives. Enough talking. Let's get into our rankings, shall we?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, we're going to be ranking 18 games. We're going to be including Bonanza. So we're going to have both Bonanza the Duel as well as Bonanza on here. And we're also including Hallertau, even though it was not technically a part of this series. It was filmed prior. So like I was mentioning at the beginning, we're going to do a 3-tier system. So we're going to basically start with the bottom 6, go into the middle, and then the top 6. And we're going to just say what they are and then discuss.
Sure.
Okay? So let's start with the 3rd tier, the lower 6 of all of these 18 games. Do you want to go first?
Sure. All right, games 18 to 13. You want me to just rapid fire all of them off?
Yes, bring it on the pad paper there.
Write it down. In dead last, it's
Yes.
going to be Ray Colt,
Okay?
followed by Atiwa, then Glass Road, Caverna Cave versus Cave, Ora et Labora, and then Bonanza the Duel.
Wow.
That is my block of the bottom 3rd.
We did not share these
didn't
lists
share
with
these
each
at all,
other.
no.
And I will try to keep my reactions tame this time around. But
Okay.
let me give you my bottom 6.
Okay.
It is number 18, Ray Colt.
Okay.
Followed by Atiwa,
Oh, okay.
Mercator, Noose Fjord, Ora et Labora, and then Caverna Cave versus Cave. So
Okay.
that is the 2-player version.
So I think we had
Caverna.
4. So in that, we both had 4 of the same games in the bottom tier.
Which ones were they?
Ray Colt, Atiwa, Caverna Cave versus Cave,
Okay.
and Ora et Labora.
Okay, so let's start there.
Okay.
Oh, you also had Ora et Labora.
I did, yeah.
Okay, so 4 out of the 6.
4 out of the 6 are in the same, yeah.
Okay, so we're a bit in agreement here that now, granted, I don't think that any of these games were bad.
No.
Like
You have to rank them. So,
you have
yeah.
to rank them.
Yeah.
I enjoyed a bit of all of them to an extent, but Ray Colt was definitely the one that stuck out.
Yeah.
That stuck out from all of them.
First time we played it was demoing it at Essen the year it released. I think that was 2018. I remember not being wowed then.
Yes.
And so going into this series, years later,
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 years later after playing that demo, replaying it again, I realized, no, I think my initial impressions were kind of right. This is not the best of games.
I liked it better, actually, when we played it again.
Really?
So when we were playing it, preparing for the series, I thought, okay, so it's a lot of math. It really is. It does feel like a math exercise. We're not going to be going through what all of these games are, by the way, but we'll give a little synopsis. Ray Colt is the one where you are farming in Iceland.
In
Ray
Reykjavik.
Colt, Iceland. So I actually really enjoyed the theme because we have both visited Iceland before. We've actually visited Ray Colt.
Oh, yeah, Ray Colt.
And-
I said Reykjavik. Yes, Ray Colt.
Ray
yes,
Colt,
correct.
yeah, and it's beautiful. What a beautiful
place.
country, right?
Yeah.
And so I was looking forward to this game, knowing about the theme, but the mechanics, it just was not engaging. It's a race at the end of the day.
It's a race to get the right amount of vegetables, to springboard yourself onto the
Yes.
next spot, to get ahead of your opponents.
Yeah, they
Worker
say
placement.
it's another take on At the Gates of Loyang, which we'll be talking about later on in the system. But I definitely don't think it was better version. It's similar in the sense that it's also a race of sorts. You're just trying to be the furthest ahead on the score track by the end of the game, as most games are.
Yep.
But your resource conversioning to get there.
Yeah, and you
It's
get
just a lot
one
of
free
math.
move going off, and I think that free move it's nice. Like you always get one free move to advance.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you can game the game with it, and so I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. It always felt like we were always getting to the same exact location every
Yeah,
time.
it felt quite flat.
Yeah. Next one for us both was Atiwa. It sounded like.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Tiwa, we also said it in our review of the game. It was one that I was really looking forward to, knowing that there was a new play on a mechanism in that game that we haven't seen before, which is the variable worker placement spots, or the way that the tile slides depending on the round. That'll change up some of the worker placement spots.
Some of them, yeah.
But it'll also change the way that your animals breed. And I thought that was interesting that now that is variable. And also the resource mat that everybody had, where everything that you take is from your own player board.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very unique idea, but there was something about it that just was not.
For me, I think
Engaging.
the biggest problem was at a certain point in the game, everything just kind of auto feeds in, and the engine just like it just plays, and you're just kind of playing to the end game. Because we played so many games of it, and every single time at about the 60% mark, it was like, I'm all set. I don't really have to worry too much. These bats are going to give me this. I'm going to go send them out. I'm going to get this, and it's just going to run like that. And that was happening game after game after game. So I could be very wrong. Maybe there is more variability than that, but it felt like it's the same puzzle that you're trying to complete every single time.
It did feel samey. And I feel like it's one of the challenges in incorporating a theme like that, because that is going to be the end goal with this theme, right? Like there's a teaching and educational aspect to the theme that he was trying to get at, but also just the movement of pieces was so tedious. Having to move the pieces back to your board and then move them back to your player board, right? So I was walking into that game really hoping for a more fun experience. Now, going a little bit further up on my list, my number 13 was Caverna Cave versus Cave. And what number was that for you?
15 on my list.
Okay, so you ranked it a little bit lower.
A little bit lower, correct,
so
yes.
Why is this in the bottom tier for you?
You got to have something there. It's a good game. I actually, we want to keep it in the collection. I enjoy playing it.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised because after we played that one, you liked it more than I did.
There you go. I don't know what to say.
No
but
reason,
people told me this is what it is, and I was like, okay, yeah, that seems right.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's a fine game.
Yeah.
Uwe Rosenberg has made a lot of 2-player only games, and I just did not find it to be the best out of all of them.
Sure.
You know, something has to go in that spot, and that's really the only reason why it's there.
I think it's a good game, and we have the big box. There's more to be added on. We haven't really explored the big box too much. We've only played, I think, one game after we played the main.
Yeah.
With the big box, and it adds a little bit extra stuff. It's a good game. It's a good 2-player game. Easy to understand, easy to play.
I think there's just nothing in that game in particular that was like, wow, like this is so interesting. And
nothing to move it into the next tier.
But I have a good time playing it. And so that's why it ranked a little bit higher than some of the other ones in this tier.
And from hearing your list, I think the only other one was Ora et Labora, which was my, I believe, number 13?
Okay.
No, my 14 on the list.
Oh, we have it at the exact same position.
Same spot, yeah.
I think we had pretty much identical experiences with Ora et Labora.
Good game, long.
I think that it really is an interesting game. It's just that it takes so long, particularly for us, because we are so paralyzed by all of the rules, right? So first of all, Ora et Labora is sort of a play on Le Havre, except now you have your own property, your beachfront / mountain property where you have to build.
Forest.
Yeah, we have to build these buildings onto, and the buildings have a requirement, like only this building can be built on a mountainside, so you have to really now plot the spatial aspect of your playing area.
And it's a clear off space.
Yeah.
You have to make sure you have access to certain different resources by clearing off. This is the first time you see the resource wheel in there.
Yes.
So it is a good game. It just, every single time we've played it, it just ran so long because you're trying to hit that end game trigger, which I can't remember what it is now.
It's I think it's like building a certain number of things, but basically you had to get the wheel to move all the way to the end game.
Right.
The resource wheel, the way that it was incorporated in that game was interesting, but also very strategic because every time it would produce, it kind of tells you how many of that specific resource you're going to produce when you take that producing action, but only one player can actually produce on one type of resource.
Right. Unlike Glass Road and Oranienburger Canal, you have your own resource board. And this one, it's a shared communal one. So if Monique takes all the wood, then you're kind of like, dang it. Like,
and you table flip?
Yeah, then you're like stuck. Then you're stuck and you're like, gotta let this wood kind of reaccumulate. That one can get a little frustrating. It could be a little bit long, but it's also really fun trying to plan out where exactly everything's going to go.
Yes. And I believe those were our only crossovers for this tier. So for the other 2 titles that we kind of differed on, I chose Mercator. I guess Mercator is my number 16, so third from the bottom.
Yeah.
That one was... I actually think that that's a pretty good game. It's probably the unsung hero, I guess, of the whole thing.
Sure.
But it's also the least like everything else,
It's very different.
it's very different, and it's very, very dry. It's all cubes and contracts.
If you were to put that in the superlatives, that would be the driest. If
Yes.
like the driest, you wouldn't want to say for sure.
And when we
Mercator.
say dry, we mean like devoid of theme.
Find your way to a city, spending time to get there, getting
Yeah.
the cubes that are produced there to accumulate them so that you can fulfill a contract in a different city.
Yes, you can literally draw out the board and then draw out the contracts and probably play a game of it, right?
Totally, yep.
With colored cubes. So that was why it made it down to the very bottom here. But really, I actually thought that was a pretty good game.
One of mine is Bonanza the Duel, a game I really enjoy. It's actually one that we take with us when we travel.
Yeah, I feel a bit betrayed.
I don't feel betrayed.
We love playing that game.
It was the best game in this tier for me. Let's say that. It was
okay.
number 13.
That's being
good game.
optimistic.
There you go. Yeah. Good game. Love it. But obviously, I did not choose regular Bonanza in this tier because that is going to be somewhere else.
Yes, you love that one
I
more.
prefer regular Bonanza over Bonanza the Duel.
Yes.
Monique is also very good at Bonanza the Duel, and I am very not so good at it.
And my other one was Newsfjord. So Newsfjord ended up making it to the bottom. I'm actually surprised that it made it down this far. But I think for me, Newsfjord was also a bit dry. It really did feel like I was on a foggy coastal port.
It's fairly light.
Yeah, it's not. That's not the problem that I actually don't have a problem with it. But it's not the fact that it's light that made it down.
I like how
this
our
way.
language has to reflect the fact that everything's in the bottom. Like
Yeah,
third.
you have to
And
justify.
It's like, no,
right?
you know,
There are going to be people out there who are like, Newsfjord is my favorite of
Yeah,
all the titles.
totally.
Why is it in your bottom tier? And this is why.
Yeah.
I did not think it was a bad game at all. There were a lot of things going for it that I found to be really interesting, like the gathering of the fish on the dinner plates, and also the turn sequence was really interesting, but it did fall a little bit on the flatter end.
I think I saw in some comments on our video that people said it is better at 3+.
I
So
kinda
I
get-
think,
yeah,
I
that
think
sense.
our experience is because it was lighter than we expected, and at 2, it just didn't have that extra element. But it's not in my tier,
That is
so
a fair point.
it's going to be possibly in my next tier.
What was the last game that we differed on for you?
It was Glass Road. Glass Road was one of those elusive games for me for a long time.
Yeah.
I wanted to play it for a very, very long time. I've been seeing it in virtual flea markets and math trades, and I'm like, oh, should I pull the trigger on getting this game? Finally got to play it, and it is a good game. I do appreciate what it's doing, but that's one of those games where somewhere at the 80% mark of the game, I'm like, is it that good compared to some of the other ones?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And it's actually fairly low. It was actually number 16 on my list.
Glass Road, huh?
Glass Road, yeah.
Yeah, Glass Road's not. I will talk about Glass Road when it gets to my ranking of it, but that's a fair assessment. I had played Glass Road before going into the series, and Naveen had not. So the only. Did you? We've only played it at 2
I've only played it at 2.
together.
Yes.
Yeah, so you've only played it 2, and so I will
You'll
go
vouch.
back to the same argument that you made for Newsfjord, that maybe it wasn't as good as it could be.
It's the follow
because
mechanism. Yeah.
In Glass Road, there is a follow mechanism that has to do with the cards, and at 2 players, it's basically just me and you.
I gotta
We're
follow
following each
you,
other.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Glass Road does tend to have a tighter scoring system. Like, you really have to look for these points in that game, so maybe that could also be part of it.
It's like I would play it. It's not one of those games that I'd be like, what else do you got? You know, I would play it. If somebody said like, okay, we're gonna play it because quick to get into,
Yeah,
it's fairly
very
fast.
quick.
Everybody's active on each other's turns. It's just something had to slot into 16, and I felt like Glass Road when I did the Pup Meeple.
Yeah.
that suited me.
All right, moving into tier number 2. So things are heating up. This is now the middle of the pack, and it is numbers 12 to 7.
Yes.
Would you like to start off?
Sure. Okay. Well, this is the last one you just spoke about. Newsfjord. Newsfjord is in
12?
there. Yeah, number 12. We
Okay.
have Hallertau at 11. All creatures big and small. That's the Agricola 2-player only. Goes next. At the Gates of Loyang, followed by Mercator, which was low on yours. And then, of course, Bonanza is the highest in this tier. So I spoke about it in reverse order.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see how many crossovers we have. So my number 12 is Glass Road.
Okay.
So not too far
So we
off.
inverted, yeah.
11 is Agricola, all creatures big and small. Then Hallertau,
Okay.
Bonanza the Duel, followed by Le Havre at number 7 at the Gates of Loyang. So 3 crossovers this time.
Yep.
Let's talk about them. They are Hallertau,
Yep.
Agricola, all creatures big and small,
And at the Gates of Loyang.
and at the Gates of Loyang.
Yeah.
So do you want to go first?
Sure. Hallertau was a game that we both played, like we said earlier in the video, that we played before even embarking on the Uwe Rosenberg series. It was the newer game that came out, I want to say, in early 2020 or 2021.
Yeah, right maybe
before
like
we started.
A year before we started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one, it's a good game. It's interesting. Like there's like kind of this push-pull mechanism where you're trying to build your structure and kind of move it along.
Yeah, you're just trying to build the community center.
Trying to build a community center. I will say it does get messy in terms of moving your resources up and down. You're basically doing a lot of accounting in that game.
Yes.
But I don't know. I really enjoy it. There's something about like, okay, these are my resources, and how am I going to be this little goblin and try to move things around and like come out ahead, you know?
Being the goblin.
Yes.
Hallertau is one that got really mixed reviews. If I'm remembering it correctly, when it came out, there were a lot of people who were like, oh, this is finally Uwe Rosenberg has another new game, and it sounds like it's going back to the farming theme, but it was not quite the farming theme, right? It had farming in it, but it was not the Agricola Caverna that maybe people were thinking.
I want to say it was the first one of his, or only game of his, that had hops in it, possibly.
Oh, that doesn't...
As a resource?
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Hops somewhere else.
Were there? Maybe not.
So many resources. But that is the game where all the resources came in one giant bag.
Huge bag.
Do not separate those components. I said it in that video and I'll say it again. Don't just leave it all.
Just leave it all in one.
Leave it all in one.
Toss it in a big bowl and grab what you need.
Yes. So Hallertau for me, I feel like it's not surprising that it's in the middle tier because I actually ended up liking it more than I think I should have. Because at the end of the day, Hallertau does feel a bit... The card play is a bit too much. Like, the card play can really get you a win when you really don't deserve one.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
The card draws can be pretty brutal.
Yeah, you can just fall into a nice card play. But I think it was so fun. There's something about it. For people who don't like math, you might not enjoy this one because it really is a lot of like, how can I get this resource to convert into this resource? You have to keep track of your resources via that tracker.
It feels like you're moving around an abacus the entire game. But if you enjoy like that, like kind of mathy accounting of like, oh, okay, I got 4 resources. I need to get them to 5 so that I can spend them all to do this, to ultimately move my community center and make these cards, really worthwhile for me, then this might be one that you'll enjoy.
Yes. We actually still own it, which is surprising because we tend to call games a lot, but that just goes to show that we both actually really did enjoy it. It's not our favorite, and that is why it is in this middle tier. Next crossover we had was Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small. Now, this is the 2-player version of Agricola, right?
Yeah.
And this was actually my number 11.
Yeah, mine number 10. My number 10 on the list. Yeah,
so
close.
right there. Yeah. Do you want to say why?
I like it better. It's weird because like I feel like I can only compare it to the Caverna 2-player game. I feel like that's like the fairest comparison. Yeah. And of the two, I prefer Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, leading up to, or I guess we had played All Creatures Big and Small for the first time in this series. And before I had found out about the big box, I think it might have appeared lower in
Definitely
my
would
ranking.
have appeared much lower.
Because I think it's actually quite good. For people who like 2-player only games, I think between the 3 of these small box 2-player only games, there was actually a third one. For anybody who didn't catch that in a previous video, there is another 2-player only small box game called Le Havre.
The Inland Port.
The Inland Port, is that right?
That's right.
And we did not cover that one. I had played it once before. It was kind of hard for us to get it. And honestly, that one, I think, maybe fell a little bit flat for me. So
would that have been number 19 on this list?
I didn't feel the oomph to include it.
Okay, she told me like we're not doing it. Yeah.
But out of all of the small 2-player only games, I think Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small was the best, even without the big box.
Sure, yeah.
And then when we made our video, so many people wrote in comments saying, oh, you have to play with the other buildings, the variable building play that we were mentioning earlier in the video.
Things,
yeah, there are a ton of other buildings that you can kind of incorporate, mix and match, and kind of cater what kind of gameplay you're going to have, and just play with this one system. And after the discovery of that, thank you to everybody who put that on our radar, that game climbed much higher on my list.
Same exact reason.
Yeah. And the third crossover we had was at the Gates of Loyang. That was my number 7, so it was almost in the first tier.
Yeah, my number 9 on the list.
Okay.
So we're like right in that same range.
Yeah, we are right in the same. Now, with this game as well as Mercator, by the way, those are 2 that are probably pretty hard to find. Mercator, we were just lucky to have a friend who had it. But at the Gates of Loyang, it was published by a company that is no longer in business. So you could probably find it on the secondhand market. it, especially if you live in the US, but I can't speak for other places around the world.
Yeah, I don't know if any company has picked it up or picked up the design, so it might be just in flux right now.
Yeah. Now, at the Gates of Liang, I quite like that game.
It's a good game, yeah.
That is a very good game. For some people I know, actually, I have a few friends who say that is their favorite Uwe Rosenberg game of all time.
Yep.
There are some really interesting sort of cutthroat things that are going on in that one. You're basically just, you are farming. There's a bit of farming in there,
You're
right?
trading different produce.
You're trying to grow produce to feed to people in your restaurant. It's very cute.
You have like casual customers
Yes.
that are coming in that you just need to feed them one time and then they go. And then you have like recurring loyal customers that you have to ongoingly feed.
Yeah.
But it's not in that, it doesn't feel like feed your workers kind of thing.
No, it's not like
it's
a
not like
Greco.
that. Yeah.
It's
Even
not
though you're
like that.
feeding customers, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but they can still get angry. You know, the regular customers need to be fed every round, and if you miss one feeding, then they become angry.
They get a little
and then
distaste.
If you don't feed them again, then you start it starts docking you
Penalties,
in that sense. And then the way that you the way that you score for your casual customers depends on how many regular customers you have. It's very clever. The card play, how you have to put a card into the courtyard, and then there's sort of this like standoff with other players. Who's going to put a card in the courtyard? Am I going to have more to choose from before I actually choose my cards?
Right.
And that would all make sense if you've played the game or if you've seen the video. But it is quite interesting in that regard, and it can be quite tactical. But the reason why it's not further up on my list, I suppose, besides the fact that it's hard to get, is because at the end of the day, the main goal here is to climb up on that track.
Yeah.
You're doing all this work to gain coins to buy your way to victory.
That's right. That's exactly it.
I thought that was a little bit strange.
So if you're on the scoring track, it's basically a race. Whoever's going to get out in front. If you're trying to go from 6 to 7, you have to spend 7 coins.
Yes.
If you're trying to get from 18 to 19, you got to spend 19 coins.
Right.
So that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to do all these different things to collect money so you can spend it to go up on a track.
Yes, and so scores end up being very tight.
Yeah.
It is a tight game
always
through
super
and through.
tight, yeah.
Yeah, but the mechanics in that are quite special.
So those are the only 3 that we had crossovered in this section. We already kind of spoke on Newsfjord in the previous section, which is what you had. That was the very first one in this next tier. That was going to be number 12 for me. And then Mercator, which is that kind of dry resource, kind of sending it from city to city. That is actually higher on my list. That is number 8 overall for me. I really enjoyed it. I would love to get a copy of it.
Why are both of those titles, I suppose, higher on your list than maybe it was on mine?
Well, Newsfjord is right on the cusp. It was just right
to
there.
be clear, it's not that high.
Yeah. Well, I did enjoy it. The fact that it was
yeah.
light was kind of nice. It felt kind of good to like, you get that box of Newsfjord.
Yeah.
And you think like, oh, what is this going to be? Like,
Right.
I haven't played it.
So
and then you
blue.
like, once you taught it, I was like, oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Like a light, just kind of
It
casual
looks
experience.
so daunting, but it's
When
not.
you get the box, it looks like it is. And then you look at
Yeah.
the components and you set it up and you're like, oh, that's it? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Like,
we
okay,
can
I
get into
totally
it.
get it. You get
Yeah.
into it. So I think that's why sometimes you want like an experience like that.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy my experience of playing Newsfjord. I do want to play it at higher player counts because I've also heard that it is a better experience when you play with 3 or potentially 4 players.
Yeah.
So it's just right on the cusp, though. It could have gone either way to the other tier. Mercator, though, that was I do like dry games. This is a very dry game. That was a really fun one. You're trying to manage your time as well as try to run around the board, collecting different types of resources from their respective cities, putting them all together so that you can go and fulfill contracts and try to re-fulfill that contract over and over and over again. It's just a fun game for me because it's kind of like this like tactical and like how you're going to get your way around and you're trying to wait till certain resources accumulate and try to capitalize on it before your opponent does. So I don't know. I thought it was a really good experience. We only played that one, I think, at 2 and maybe 3.
No, I think we played it at
3 also? Yeah.
Also, but not any higher than that. And
And
that was
both-
one of the earlier ones that
Yeah.
we covered.
Yeah, we didn't play it at 4, but both player counts felt balanced and good for me. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it.
I specifically remember in the moment when we were covering Mercator that you were quite impressed. Naveen was very,
liked
very
it, yeah.
happy about that game and was like, why is this such a sleeper hit?
Yeah,
Like,
why is it not in print?
yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm speaking from somebody who put it lower on on my list, but it is quite dry, but mechanically sound.
Yep. And of course, the last one in this list, the highest one in this tier would be Regular Old Bonanza. Love that game. It's a great game. You're bean farming. You're basically trading with your opponents.
Yes.
Very interactive, super interactive. Might be his most interactive game. Like I said, you're bean farming. You are trying to trade with your opponents because you're kind of stuck in the situation where you cannot move the cards that are in your hand.
Yeah.
And sometimes cards in your hand just get in the way, and you're like, I know if I give you this card, it's going to be really good for you, but it's going to be equally or even better for me to give off this card to you so that I can get my farm right. And so
My
I don't
bean
know.
farm.
My bean farm, right? I don't know. It's. I always have a really good time with it, and that's why it's number 7 on my list.
I'm honestly quite shocked that it's higher on my list than on yours because Naveen loves
That is funny. Yeah.
Bonanza. He will take Bonanza, and I'll say no, let's not play Bonanza. It can be
Like, why
very
not?
long, and I'll talk about it more when it appears on my list. But I am quite shocked, honestly.
That is so funny. It's weird. Yeah, I like Bonanza more than you, but it's higher on your list.
Yes.
Oh, Pub Meeple, what have you done?
And for me, the 3 titles that differed from your list were number 12 for me was Glass Road. So it's not actually that far off from yours.
Yep.
I do think that I like Glass Road just a little bit more than you do. I could tell that just from, I was excited actually to show him Glass Road because Glass Road was one of the first Uwe Rosenberg games I'd ever played. Actually, I think it was the first one.
Maybe.
Because I started playing Glass Road when I first got into the hobby. A friend taught it to me, and that was before I even knew who Uwe Rosenberg was. And I thought, this is interesting. You know, it was what introduced me to this style of art and just this theme. So I was actually introduced to the wheel before any of the other farming games. So maybe I do have a slight, bit of attachment to it. And I have also played it with more than 2 players.
Right.
So I can kind of see what the game is capable
You can vouch
of.
for that experience.
Yeah, but it also does, I do agree with a lot of the points you made, and so that is why it is at the bottom of the middle tier for me.
Okay.
The next one for me was Bonanza the Duel, which was my number 9, and I know that appeared much lower. That was in your tier 3.
Yep.
I cannot believe that. Bonanza, we love Bonanza the Duel.
We do,
We do a lot of videos where we talk about travel games, or we actually did one more recently, and we did not mention Bonanza the Duel, but
Right.
this is actually one of our most traveled games.
It's small box.
It is.
You get the Bonanza experience. It's done very well for 2 players.
Yeah.
The way you kind of have to give up different beans. It's the
Yeah.
same thing, beans.
It is so funny.
And you're trying to match these different contracts that are on some of these cards to score more points.
Yeah.
It's a good game. I really enjoy it.
I do. I have seen people review it sort of lukewarm. I don't know if other people share the same fervor that I have for Bonanza the Duel. I think it's also dependent on who you're playing with because with Bonanza the Duel, what sets it apart from some of the other games, even regular Bonanza, is that bluffing aspect. Because you have all of the beans in the middle and you have to gift each other a bean card.
Yeah.
And you might not even have the bean card in your hand, but you can still pretend to gift it. And I think that is what's
You don't want
so
them to take you up on the
funny.
offer. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a really funny experience.
Yeah, those are the big 3 that we always travel with, used to
Yeah.
travel with at least, were Bonanza the Duel, Hanami Koji, and Shotten-Totten.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little bit offended that it was a little bit lower on your list. And the last one is Le Havre. Le Havre was my number 8, which was just 1 step above Bonanza the Duel, and we haven't heard it on your list yet.
I didn't mention it in this
Which
last tier.
makes sense because I know going into Le Havre, that was a game that Naveen was much more excited about, I think, than me. You even played the app, right?
I have the app. The app's great.
Yeah, and we'll save that for when it gets to your list, I guess.
Sure.
But for me, Le Havre runs a bit too long because you have to build out all the buildings, if I'm remembering correctly. I do like a lot of things that Le Havre does, especially because it is such a simple concept. You move your ship and then you either take resources or you build buildings. Like the options are so simple and so straightforward, but it's the end goal that is so interesting because it's like, for me, it's his first like truly economic game. But
Yeah.
it's not economic like other games such as like Brass or anything that like really exchanges money. It's all in the form of these buildings. You're buying buildings, but you can also sell them back, but you're going to take half the amount that you spent for them, but you're also buying ships. And then you can utilize the buildings. So I do find it quite interesting. And that's why it made it into this middle tier. But it also just gets so messy. By the end of the game, if you catch the playthrough, like all the buildings are just
The cards
all
are
over the
everywhere.
place.
Yeah, they are.
I
Yeah.
struggle a bit with games that sort of end like that. But it is in my middle tier after all. So it's a good game.
That's fair.
All right, moving on to the final tier. This is the top 6 games on both of our lists, and I think we'll go one by one this
Okay,
time
sure.
since it is the top of the cream of the crop.
There you go. The top of the top.
All right, coming in at number 6, Naveen.
Number 6, this is the newest one to us, one that we did not think we were going to cover on the channel. If you know, it is Oranienburger Canal. Very, very good 1 or 2 player only game. This was a very limited release in terms of production and how many copies are out there. It was on GameFound, and so we weren't sure if we were going to cover it. And so we fortunately were able to borrow one of our friends' copy. And it's a fantastic game. You are trying to build out different routes on your own board and put different types of structures or buildings around it and try to make those structures or buildings trigger so that you can try to get more resources to score more points.
You're building the Uranienburger Canal.
You're building the canal, so you're trying to build rail lines and different pathways and the canals, and you're trying to cozy up things next to each other, try to build bridges or canal bridges from building to building so that you can try to trigger them. It's very, very simple design, but also complex at the same time.
Right.
I really enjoy the turn structure in this game, the way we kind of mentioned it earlier in the video. This one has it in a 2-player game. One player is going to go 3 times on one round, and the other player will go 2 times. And so you're trying to figure out, okay, Monique really needs that spot. I could use that spot. I don't know. It's just a very, very good experience. It is freshest in my mind in terms of all the Uwe Rosenberg games. So that probably plays some role into it, but I still really, really enjoy it. And I'm very glad that we were able to pick up our own copy of it. And so that is my number 6. That is Oranienburger Canal.
Awesome. Oranienburger Canal, I have not spoken about yet. So I'll talk about it more when it gets to that point.
Okay.
But my number 6 is Bonanza, the game that I guess I like more than you, even though
you like it by one more than me.
Like it more than I do, truly. Bonanza is a fantastic game. If you've never played any Uwe Rosenberg game before, this is not going to give you an idea as to how the other games play.
You know how
because it's so different.
Yeah, in the superlatives we said most different. I said Mercator. Bonanza is very much so in that.
This is just a card game. You are bean farming and bean trading. And the trading is where a majority of the gameplay takes place. You are there's so much player interaction. You are asking, do you have a red bean? I'll trade you for this bean. It gets very political. It is the game where you cannot change the order of cards that are in your hand. So if you ever hear that mechanic, the first time I've seen that was from Bonanza. And every time we play it, there are laughs around the table. It's just a good time. The reason why I don't like it as much as, the reason why I think Naveen likes it more than I do is because I sometimes veto the game because it can run a bit long.
She feels like it runs long.
I do.
I disagree because as the rounds go on, the first round is the longest.
Yeah.
But as the rounds go on and people start scoring, cards come out of the deck. So as you shuffle and go through it, it's just going to be faster and faster as it goes along.
And there are different versions now of the game. So I think that when we played Bonanza fairly recently this year at
Aircon.
At Aircon with a fine group of folks. Thank you so much for playing that with us. And they were playing with the newest edition of the game that was different from ours. They don't have a third field.
They do not have a third field. Yeah, I think you're right.
So just be aware that there are other versions of it. I think I liked that version better, the one without the third field. So I would recommend maybe trying that. But also, can you imagine? He designed Bonanza, and he designed A Feast for Odin. He also designed At the Gates of Loyang. Like, these are super different games. Yeah. And that is why I think he is such a fantastic designer.
My number 5 is 2-player only again. This is A Fields of Arle. 2-player only where part of the actions you're going to take are going to be on one side of the board, and then at the next round, you're going to take actions on the other side of the board. And so trying to figure out, like, okay, I need this in this action on this time, and then hopefully when it's my turn, that one spot of these like 12 spots that I can go to is open for me. But of course, Monique takes the one spot that I need to go to, so I got to find other clever ways to get the things that I need. Which actions am I going to upgrade so that they're better every single time I take them?
Yes.
There's a lot of little things that are going on in this game that I really, really enjoy. And this was one of those games that we had not played. It sat on our shelf of shame for a very, very long time. And so because of doing this series, we were able to pull it off the shelf and play it several times and really, really enjoyed it every single time I played it.
Yeah, big box, 2-player only. All right, well, my number 5 is Agricola, which I'm not actually surprised by. Agricola was a game that I think, had I even played it, I think maybe it was one of the games that I hadn't played going into the series.
Agricola was a game that we had not played. We had played Caverna before that.
And I was so surprised by that because when we were getting into the hobby, Agricola was like the game that everybody was going into tournaments for.
Everybody had that foundational knowledge of Agricola. Yeah. In the medium to medium heavy, like
and
for a new gamer.
I think at the time its reputation succeeded, or whatever that saying is. I heard about how heavy it was before even getting to try it, and that was daunting for me. You know, when you first get into the hobby, you're just trying to explore games. You don't want to get into anything that's too intense.
Anything that is marketed by people as the game punishes you.
Yeah,
is like,
doesn't sound like a fun board game.
Like, I don't know.
Yes. Now I have a good understanding of why people consider that game to be a masterpiece. It is really punishing. It sometimes does not feel good to play that game.
Yep.
And so that is why it is kind of a little bit lower in this tier as opposed to some of the other games that it might be similar to it. But it is a very well-designed game. They do not make games like that as often as they did back then, I feel, where
you can really
hurt yourself.
Yeah.
Like, you really are stealing worker placement spots from other people. The timing of when you take certain spots is so important. It is variable in the occupations and such that you put into play, and you're sweating the whole time.
It's a really, really good game. It is actually my number 4 on my list, so we can just go ahead and just reveal that now since we're talking about
so
it.
We just kind of blend in. So yours is just slightly higher. The one last thing, though, that I want to say is, even though Agricola is so high on my list, this is more of an objective viewpoint. In terms of fun factor and how often do I want to play these games, it would not probably appear that high because of how painful it can be. But I can objectively see it as a really, really, really well-designed game. Like, that really set the tone for a lot of things in this space.
Yeah, this one is, it's really tight, and like, you're always, every single round, you have to almost, it feels like to me that you almost have to dedicate one of your actions to somehow eking out some food. And so it's like sometimes you have 3 workers.
I think that's a fact.
Right? I think in the game you start with 2, and then you can grow your family to 3, 4, you know. But every single round, one of your workers is like anchored to this need to feed. And that stress of like, how the heck am I going to do this? But I still want to build this and I want to do that.
I mean,
I still have to think about this food.
What you really want to do is create a food engine.
Yes.
So if you can get that going, that's what you really want to do, because you don't want to be in later rounds trying to just get the fish or whatever it is, right? You want to be able to create a process that's like, okay, it's not as stressful to feed later on in the game.
Yeah,
right?
and building towards that engine is one of the funnest parts for me.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I didn't mention that is quite interesting about this game is just the way that it scores. You know, it scores, I think, are low, if I remember correctly.
You got to do a little bit of everything.
You have to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Instead of like, more recent Euro games where it's like you can kind of specialize and just hit that one thing really hard and score so many points because of this one path that you took. In Agricola, you have to do it all because you're going to get docked points if you don't have one type of animal or something. There's like a chart that you follow that'll tell you.
You can get literally negative points if like you omit getting a certain type of animal or a certain type of resources, things like that.
So you need to spread out.
You do, So you have to manage your animals, you have to manage your crops, you have to manage your people. Really, really good game.
Yeah.
That is my number 4 and your number 5, Agricola.
My number 4 is Oranienburger Canal. So we've touched upon this one a little bit. This is one of the ones, by the way, we are so sorry. We have not been discussing which games we got as review copies.
Yes.
Oranienburg Canal was actually a game that was lent to us by Jennifer. Thank you so much, in order to do the video. And then we got a review copy of that one. I think other than that, the other review copies we got were Reykholt, which is the one that appeared at the bottom of our list. Newsfjord,
Atiwa,
Hallertau. I think that's it.
That might be it.
That might be it, because a lot of the other games are so old, you know.
We bought them.
Or we bought them, or we had them, or we traded for them. So anyway, Oranienburg Canal is one of them. And this was a very big surprise for me. Like Naveen was mentioning, we were not planning on covering Oranienburg Canal at all because it did not have distribution in North America. And we really kind of care about that because it's, we don't want to, make a gameplay video and it's like, well, sorry, now you can't get it. Just watch it play
Mercator or Loyang, but this was the newest one.
Yes, and then we went to Japan on our recent trip, and we saw it there. So we thought, you know what? It has a wider distribution in other areas of the world. Like, we should probably cover it.
And I could see it being picked up by somebody.
We don't know where it's at right now.
We don't know where it is right now.
So maybe it is getting distributed in North America, or maybe it's already here. We're not sure.
Who knows?
But it is so good. I really, really enjoyed that. And it's interesting that it's another. It seemed like a small box 2-player game, but it's really not.
No, yeah.
It is like a big. It's not as big as Fields for Arl. Like Fields for Arl is a really heavy 2-player game. Oranienburg Canal is It is exactly how Naveen described it, but just that there's so much going on for it in terms of the metagame, of the worker placement, which spots do I take? There's only a certain number of spots where you can actually build buildings. And then
or build bridges, yeah.
Where you can build bridges, and then build bridges, and the spatial aspect of, okay, how am I going to plot my routes? Because some of the cards require you to have certain routes around it. So there's a large spatial component to it, but there's also the timing of when to actually trigger your buildings. And all of that into one makes for a really crunchy, satisfying puzzle.
Yeah, and you have to take the opportunities when you can on certain actions. Sometimes like you're taking an action, it's like, and you can build a path, and you can build a something, and you're like, I don't know what needs to go here, but I'm going to build a canal here and try to find the card that's going to make that work.
Yeah.
Because you have to take opportunities when they're presented to you, because if not, you're going to find yourself like, oh, I wish 3 rounds ago I built a railroad track here, because that would have been so perfect. So it's a really, really good game. We really enjoy it, and I'm actually really looking forward to getting into the other decks.
Expansions.
Yeah.
Now, granted, there is a bit of recency bias, right? That always comes into some of this. That is the most recent game that we covered, but so was Atiwa, and they made it onto very different ends of our list.
Yeah.
So anyway, highly impressed by Oranienburg Canal. That was my number 4.
All right, this comes down to the top 3 Uwe Rosenberg games of all time up to now, because who knows what's coming out.
Yes, it's true.
My number 3 is Caverna, the Cave Farmers.
Wow.
Big box. This is one of those games that I actually picked up on a whim. It had the, what's it called? The broken token insert.
Yeah.
When I got it. I think I got it in a trade or somehow, some way I found it. It's a great game. There's always that question of Agricola versus Caverna.
Yeah, which one do you like more?
Which one do you like more? I like Agricola, but clearly with Caverna being number 3 and Agricola being 4,
yes,
Caverna just inches it out just a little bit more. I really enjoy in Agricola the fact that you can kind of go and craft those weapons.
Yes,
and
yes.
go on those.
In Caverna.
In Caverna, that you can go craft those weapons. And kind of go on those little excursions.
Yes.
And kind of build out your cave, but also build out the forest area.
Yeah.
Put different building tiles down. And it's just a really, really fun game. It's very similar in that vein as like Agricola, but it just adds those elements that make it that much sweeter.
It's Agricola with an opposite feel.
Yeah.
Completely different feel. I'm actually very surprised that this is in your top tier, because the first few times we played Caverna, I think it took a little bit of time for it to stick.
So Caverna was one that I had played before going into the Uwe Rosenberg series.
Yeah.
And then we had played it once, maybe twice, and then there was a huge lag time before leading into playing this. And then we played it more and more, getting ready to be able to film it. It's the playing it more and more, getting ready to film it, where I really saw some of the strategies. The first time I was kind of wandering aimlessly.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You're just kind of wandering around and I don't really... In a lot of we didn't mention this. In a lot of Uwe Rosenberg games, you're gonna look down and be like,
"Huh,
how the? I don't see where this is gonna ramp up." There's a ton of that in a bunch of his games.
Yeah,
because it's that's gonna cost a lot of ore. There's only one coming out every round. How's it gonna happen?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, as you get going, and so the first game or two, I didn't see that ramp up.
Yeah,
and so it's so hard to predict what actions make sense. As you play it more and more, you discover more and more as to what you need to do by a certain point, and then you can go on different paths, And so that's what made this game in top 3 for me.
Yeah, I remember the first couple of times Naveen played it in particular. We would play it again, and he would say, I'm just not seeing it. I don't know. What are you supposed to do in this game? What am I supposed to do?
And I wasn't appreciating it.
Yeah.
It's just I was not making combinations or making decisions.
You weren't seeing the path.
I wasn't seeing a pathway. I would just take this random action, maybe that's door A, and then all of a sudden I'm doing something in door D, and then I'm doing something in door B, but they're never coming together, converging. Yeah. So then as you see that kind of happen, then the game becomes way more enjoyable. Yeah.
And the game becomes a game.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that is my number 3. That is Caverna.
Okay. I will have more to say on that in a bit, but my number 3 is one that you'd already mentioned. It's Fields of Arle. I quite enjoyed Fields of Arle. The first time we played it, I actually didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would for some reason. And then we played it more, and I really started to see what it's getting at and sort of what makes it so great. Fields of Arle, by the way, we mentioned it earlier, but this is the 2-player big box heavy experience, but only for 1 or 2 players. And I think the reason why I didn't really take to it initially was because I saw a lot of similarities. I saw a lot of precursors to A Feast for Odin that I felt like was like, when you kind of see the premature version of something, it's a little bit more lackluster. Maybe if I had played it in the opposite order, I would have had a different experience. But eventually I got to a point where I kind of saw the game for what it was and how tactical it is. I really enjoy the different seasons mechanism that you're kind of alluding to, and the fact that once per round, one person can jump to the opposite side, but it also affects turn order.
It does.
It's so clever in that sense.
So if you jump ship, then you are going second on the next
for
one.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if you're already going second, then it's like, I'm going to definitely jump to the other side. But the timing of that, because what if the other player does it first? He was able to produce a very tactical two-player experience in a big, heavy gameplay, and I thought that was really cool. Being able to go up on the tracks in order to maximize the outcomes of some of the actions was really interesting, but also figuring out which tracks to go up on, because don't just go up on them willy-nilly. It's very expensive to do that. So you better go up on the tracks that you're going to utilize.
It's expensive in both time and resources.
Yeah.
Like you have to spend one of your few workers to just be able to say, okay, I'm going to go make this action better. Was that worth it? Was that a good use of that? Did you do it early enough in the game that you're going to be taking that better action better and more times?
Yes.
So which action do you take?
Exactly.
Which pathway am I going to go down?
But there are also so many other things that are going for it. The fact that you have to clear your board, but there are only certain spots that'll actually allow you to do that. And if you have them on your board, it's negative points. I think it's Pete. There's always Pete. in Uwe Rosenberg's games. He likes to utilizes Pete a lot. It's a very clever game. Really, really well done.
Lots of things to do in it.
Yeah, lots of things to do. And that is one that is still in our collection, one that sat in our collection also.
That's what's so great about doing these series.
Yes.
It's like it forces you to play it.
It forces you to play
and
those
then you're
games.
like, I've had this for 4 years?
Yeah.
What the heck?
What have I been missing out?
Yeah. So, but it's nice to know that we own it.
All right. The final two. Naveen, what is your number 2 favorite game of Uwe Rosenberg's games?
Penultimate on my list, as Monique would like to say.
Right.
It is an older one.
Okay.
One that we have not mentioned before. Le Havre.
Le Havre. I mentioned it.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned it.
Yeah, it's lower on my list.
I think because it was so low, I was like, this.
Just forget it. Don't even mention it at this point, right?
Let's not talk about it. Moni kind of already mentioned some of the mechanisms when she talked about it, but for me, this one is really, I like this one a lot because of the way the energy is used in this game. So there's, you get the resources like Pete, and then you want to convert it. This is like the very first time you see any of his conversions. You want to convert it into better stuff, but in order to convert it, you better have the building, or your opponent has the building that allows you to convert these raw materials into better quality materials. And there's this huge economy going on with a bunch of different resources. You have to still feed your people, so you have to always be tethered to that idea of like, I need to take care of my family in order to kind of prosper in this society. You're trying to build different ships to try to ship different goods, and there's a lot of different things going on in it, but on your turn, it's very simple. You just move the pawn. Do you want to take all the things? Do you want to construct a building?
Yeah.
Or do you want to activate one of your buildings, essentially? So I don't know. The app makes it really, really easy to learn if you've already played the physical game.
Oh, okay.
If you were to download the app, it's a fantastic app. I could see this being super difficult to understand, but reinforcing my gameplay by playing the app after we had played the game a bunch made it kind of elevate for me. The AI on the computer is fairly good on the app, and I don't know, it's just such a smooth design for me. Now, I know you did mention that it gets kind of messy with all the buildings.
But I guess not with the app, right? I've never played the app.
The app is nice and neat, and then like as long as you can kind of section things off, then it's not too bad.
Yeah, I knew that this was going to be high on your list. Truthfully, I didn't realize it was going to be number 2. I didn't know that it was going to be that high.
I didn't think about it until I put it in Pub Meeple, and every time it was showing up, I was smacking down another game and like allowing this one to go. And then it showed up at number 2, and I was like, you know what? Yes, I would still pick that in that top 3, top 4. And sure enough, when I look at Le Havre, Caverna, and Agricola, I think Le Havre is my favorite of those 3.
And sometimes you love a game for no other reason but the fact that you love it.
Yes,
right.
That's
and
exactly
so I feel like that a lot of that kind of shines through.
I want to play it again.
With your choice.
Yeah.
All right. My number 2, this is my penultimate choice, is Caverna, the Cave Farmers. So this is not actually one that I was surprised by. I was sort of pseudo hoping that I would find a game along the way that would supersede that for me, because I already knew going into the series that I really loved Caverna, especially as opposed to Agricola. They are very different experiences, but they pretty much play on a lot of the same mechanisms. It's the same theme. It looks very similar. You have the same like board and like main board, and it uses the same sort of system in terms of the worker placement spots. But just the things that he added to Caverna just changes the feel entirely. This is the first sandbox game that I've ever played. And that's kind of where Naveen was kind of running into his issues with it the first few times he played it. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that feeling of running around with your head cut off. Right?
Yeah, you aren't being funneled into like, this is the decision you must make.
There are no obvious decisions. You just go and make a decision and then you keep making them to try to build something. But the thing that feels so good about Caverna is there are many parts of the game that are just an obvious serotonin release. Like you can always go on an adventure. And whenever you go adventuring with your, are they dwarves?
Yeah,
your dwarf that makes weapons, you're always going to get something. And it kind of reminds me of my childhood of like when you go to like, a place where you can
like a Chuck
win.
E. Cheese?
Yeah, where you can win prizes. And it's like, well, these are the different tiers depending on how many tickets you have. It is sort of like that.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny.
You can choose from the menu of items. And even in that decision, you're like, which items are going to serve me the most, So it's very strategic in that regard. But there's just so much more that you can do with it. And just that feeling of your head is buried in this game, creating this grand plan that's going to come to fruition or not is just such a fun experience.
And then you take that base game experience and you add on one of your favorite things, which is asymmetry with the Forgotten Folk expansion, which you haven't mentioned. I think playing that is what elevated the game for you.
The very first time I played Caverna was with the expansion, the Forgotten Folk expansion. And we did not cover it. We didn't feature it because not everybody is going to have that expansion. And I believe they released 2 more expansions after that we haven't played, just so you know. But with the Forgotten Folk expansion, everybody plays as an asymmetric faction. And there's a very strong power that's associated with it and a very strong negative. Is that a boon?
Something like that. Like you're really good at something, but to counteract that, it's like, but you're also hurting in this one other thing.
Yes, and it also includes some other new mechanisms and resources that are not part of the base game. But I really, really enjoyed it with that, but I also enjoy it without it. So I think Caverna is an excellent game. Some might say a masterpiece. It really depends on where you are.
Fantastic.
In that threshold of Agricola versus Caverna. So. That is my number 2, Caverna, the Cave Farmers, which leads us to our number 1. And I think we both did not mention the same title.
I already knew this one for you, but this one is also my favorite as well.
So our favorite game of Uwe Rosenberg's of all time up to this point is A Feast for Odin.
Yeah.
Yes. And this does not come as a surprise, I think, to either of us. This was our favorite game of his going into the series before we even started. And I think honestly, sometimes at least my top 5 games of all time they rotate. Right, depending on my mood.
Sure.
And every now and then, this is my favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
So it's not a surprise. It rotates
in that 5.
Yeah. The top 3 to 5.
I don't remember where it was in my top 50 of all time, but it's somewhere up there.
Yeah, it's definitely somewhere up there. Up there with Vital Lacerda's games, with Scythe. These are all games that I really, really love. And so this is definitely still the number 1 of all 18 or so games that we played. So A Feast for Odin is the other sandbox game, probably the most sandbox game that I've ever played.
Sure.
It incorporates so many of his previous mechanisms. You've got the worker placement, but now it's this massive board, massive menu that people will look at and run in the opposite direction.
It's what makes teaching the game a little difficult because like you want to say like these type of actions are all grouped together, but you need to know every single one of these actions just so everyone's clear about it.
It's also really interesting because you start the game with negative points. Like you have to cover up your entire board. And like Naveen was saying, sometimes with these games, it's really hard to kind of foresee the ramp up. And in this game in particular, you're like in round 5 sometimes and you're like, I have so many negatives. I'm gonna just see myself out.
Yeah. Somehow though, like by the 6th and 7th round, you're just like, and it just kind of all like sets itself. As long as like you've gone on a direction that makes sense. It's kind of like in that same vein of Caverna. You could technically take a bunch of actions that don't really work together, and kind of just go nowhere. But with experience in this game, you should be able to get a lot of those negatives off of your back.
There are 2 versions of the game. There's the 6th round and the 7th round, and we will always say that the 7-round game is the main game because the 6th-round game does not allow for enough ramp up in our experience. But a major part of the game is the polyomino tiles. So I found it to be super interesting that he took the polyomino experience from like his other tile laying games and incorporated that into a big box game. I was sort of alluding to that in Fields of Arle, that you kind of see the premature versions of that. Like you see the polyomino tiles that need to go into your vehicles. They get flipped over. But it is a very precursor to what a Feast for Odin really is. I mean, the game comes with like 2 trays of these tiles that are all, color-coded, and you have to upgrade them and flip them over. And it's just this really intense experience.
Yeah, there's so much going on in this one. Competition for spots in a 2-player game is less. I think I like this game best at 3 and 4 players.
Yeah, it plays really well at higher player counts.
Higher player counts, just because it does get tighter and just agonizing waiting for your turn to be able to go whaling or something like that.
Yeah.
In a higher player count, it's just a little bit more interesting. I still enjoy playing it at 2, but the Norwegians expansion also really solidified this game as my number 1 because it's not so much like an expansion that adds different things.
Although it does. It adds a lot more variety in terms of the islands.
It's more of a
large component.
Fix-it expansion for me. I think it just it balances things out. It adds another animal in there, like the horses, is it?
Yeah.
And then also it changes some of the worker placement boards. And then it also added this element of a 5th column where you can place your workers out to take actions. But if you place your worker out there, that's the end of your round for you. So you're kind of doing this thing where you're kind of waiting. When is the right time to go and take that really sweet action? The game also comes with a ton of cards, those occupation cards.
The cards that we were mentioning earlier.
Which can be useful, but what I really enjoy about it is if you find yourself in an occupation that you've drawn and you're like, this is not good for me, there's an opportunity to get rid of them just to score some points, which is also really, really nice in the game.
Yeah, that Norwegians expansion is my favorite expansion of all time. And honestly, that is the way that I prefer expansions to be. I don't necessarily need an expansion to introduce a entirely new concept into a game that I already love. I would just rather it improve upon the game that I love to make me love it more, right? Something that I can incorporate from the get-go and not have to teach somebody the base game and then the expansion.
Right.
The Norwegians expansion is exactly that.
Yeah, whenever we teach new players, we'll just teach with the Norwegians expansion, not even tell you what is the difference between the two with and without the expansion.
Yeah, but A Feast for Odin is just such a unique experience. We can go on and on about that game, but there's just so much going on with it that you don't really see in other games. Even something just like the income mechanic, how you have to cover up the income and then maybe get additional islands and more experienced players. And I wouldn't even consider ourselves. We've played this game a lot, but we're not particularly good. Sorry, Nivian, I don't know if that's true for you, but I know I'm not particularly good at it. But if you want to get really good at it, you have to be able to utilize those islands, and that's for me, that's the hard part.
Yeah,
right?
early gaming with this, it's like I'm gonna take on more negatives by taking on an island.
Yes.
No, thank you. No, there's enough time. There's enough way to go ahead and get those islands covered, to score points, to use them to your advantage. It's just a fantastic game. There's so many different avenues and pathways that you can go on.
Yeah.
And if you see that one of your opponents is kind of running away on a pathway, you're like, enough.
Get competitive. Start
that.
Stealing it. And that's what's so great because it mixes both the competition for spots as well as the openness at the same time. Like you can always zag or you can just compete with somebody who's doing something too much. There's always a competition for flipping over your boats, right? Because that always scores a lot of points, but now you're out of commission on a boat. It's just such a clever game. Very well designed. And up to this point, I still think it is his magnum opus.
Number one for both of us, yeah.
Number one. Well, there you have it. That is our final ranking. Oh my gosh, it's done. Naveen, it's done.
Done.
Whew! I cannot begin to describe the feeling of relief of being able to close this chapter of our lives, not just the viewing of the channel. It's really of our lives because we've been having this in the back of our mind for 2 years.
We love the games.
We do love the games.
Absolutely love the games.
But there's a difference between just exploring the games and the content creation aspect to it. They're completely different parts of having to do something like this. But it's important for you to know that this list was not exclusive exclusive. There are other games that we did not cover. There are only a few of them that we weren't able to include, but I know I mentioned the 2-player only inland port as an example, but these are a majority of them that he had released. And we'll see if we can continue to cover them, but this is probably the largest sort of series that we'll ever be able to embark on.
Yeah, as more games come out, very similar to the Lacerda series. As more games come out, hopefully we can try to still feature them, but there's not like this kind of
love Uwe Rosenberg's games.
Yeah, but there's not this kind of like, oh my gosh, we have 6 more games on the horizon that we still have to cover that are all 2.5 hour games. So that does feel pretty nice. So we can kind of get back to our other scheduled programming.
Yes. So before we get to what's coming up next, we want to thank, of course, Daniel from the Game Table and Jennifer for lending us some of the games that we were able to cover. Thank everybody out there who's been following along on the series, because this was a very difficult endeavor for the both of us. Thank you to all the publishers who are very supportive in this as well. Most notably, Asmodee and Lookout Games were very supportive in making sure that we had the games that we needed.
Yeah, Capstone Games sent us a Glass Road. So yeah, we had all the games that we could grab, and so we were able to. Spielworks also, thank you so much for sending a copy of Oranienburg Canal. Because again, it's on our top tier, and so we're really excited to have that
Very
now.
good game, and I really hope that gets a wider distribution if it has not already. So now that this is done, moving forward, I know a lot of people have been asking, what series are you going to do next? We are going to do the rest of the Mind Clash stuff that we had started. There were a lot of issues in terms of the Mind Clash series, in terms of what was happening in our lives at the time when we had started that, as well as now running along with the Uwe Rosenberg series. Right. Now that we've been talking about it, clearly, we couldn't have done both at the same time, which we now know.
Timing-wise,
and for the Uwe Rosenberg series, I believe we did at least 5 more games than we had anticipated. So it was just a big time commitment. So we are actually we have been actively working on Anachrony, which is going to come next. So you should stay tuned for that. And then after that, we're going to take a little bit of a break before we start on a new series because of a few reasons. First thing is we are actually moving out of our house for a few months. So that'll make doing something like that very difficult.
Very difficult.
And also because we want to get back to just covering older games in general. That is our passion. We love covering older games that are still good, that still hold up to this day, and sort of spreading the word about it. So we'll be doing that before we embark on anything new.
Also, if you all want to let us know in the comments section what you would rank as your top 18, top 20, whatever. However many games you've played of Uwe Rosenberg, we love to see that. We'd like to see where kind of our ranks stack up, and also where other people's ranks stack up to other people. So
and why?
And
we
why?
would love to hear whatever you're willing to share. We definitely read those, and it plays a role in how we think about these games.
Yeah, it does.
Again, thank you all so much for your support. We really hope you enjoyed the series, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.